Yeah.
The skill I am analysing for this assessment is a volleyball serve. The serve is a very important part of volleyball as it can win games if done well and is needed at the start of every point. Being a beginner to the game of volleyball, I was very unconfident when serving for my pre-test, sitting in the cognitive stage, but I was determined to get better over the weeks of training. This consisted of me struggling to make 5 out of 10 of my serves over. By incorporating force summation, projectile motion, and Newton's laws in my training, I was able to improve my capabilities and become a more confident volleyball server, which I now sit in the associative stage because of this. I would place myself in the associative stage now, as I am no expert at the skill, but I can confidently get the ball over the net 9 out of 10 times to a sufficient standard. Practicing my skill frequently was the most crucial part to becoming more confident. The best type of practice which benefited my skill learning was the part whole. This meant that I could spend half the lesson working on the dynamics of my skill and go through the biophysical principle, then applying what I had learnt in the game situation. I found the most productive method of applying this training was practicing my serve in groups of 2 to 4, either doing a drill or discussing and breaking down the process of serving together. Then in the second half of the lesson, combining with another group for a game to put what we had learnt into a competitive situation in order to become more competent. The main factors that influenced my skill learning were competition and facilities. Facilities affected my skill learning because most of the time serving requires having a whole court so that I know I am hitting the ball with the right force and angle as I would in a game situation. Having to share the courts with the rest of the class meant I had to take this into account and plan out my sessions around this basis, while still being able to do beneficial training. Competition had an effect on me, especially in game-based training, as when playing people that were more competent players than me, this meant I had to step up even more in order to compete against them, or I just wasn't up to a high enough standard to play them, which made it hard for me to play properly and improve. During my training, there were 3 main biomechanical principles which I had to take into account and use in order to become a more confident volleyball server. These 4 principles are force summation, Newton's laws, projectile motion, and balance and stability. The first principle, force summation, consists of engaging my muscle systems in the correct order and sequence, bigger muscles followed by smaller muscles, in order to get the most out of my serve. The first part of the serve, throwing the ball up, is crucial so that I have enough time in my jump to hit the ball at the right height and making sure the ball is in the right position for me to hit at the right angle. When lifting the ball directly above me into the air, from left shoulder extension to flexion, deltoid is the agonist and latissimus dorsi antagonist. This engages the deltoid pectoral in my throwing arm, followed by my bicep and forearm at the end of the throw, as this movement is mainly in the shoulder, using the ball and socket joint. The next part of the serve is the jump, as my knees, which are a hinge joint, go into slight flexion, hamstring being the agonist and quadriceps being the antagonist. My quadriceps and hamstrings engage as I push up into knee extension. This is then followed by plantar flexion in my ankles, which is a synovial joint, as I spring off the ground into my jump. As I push into the air, my upper left arm abducts, then shoulder and elbow flexion, bicep being the agonist and tricep antagonist, as well as wrist extension, set up my arm ready to hit the ball with enough momentum to gain sufficient power. While this happens, my right arm stays fairly straight with slight elbow flexion, but abducted it out to the side to remain stable and balance my weight while in the air, engaging my deltoid in order to do this. When making contact with the ball, my left arm swings through and makes contact above my head, slightly in front of my body, with the palm of my hand, while maintaining a fairly straight arm. This ensures I have the correct direction of force to hit the ball at the right angle over the net. As I first swing my arm forward before hitting the ball, this engages my deltoid and latissimus dorsi to build up momentum in my arm, followed by my pectoral and tricep when making contact with the ball, finishing with my forearm as I flick my wrist into wrist flexion, which is an ellipsoid joint. This follows the bigger to smaller muscles rule in formation, which means that I can get the most power out of my serve in a controlled way. After making contact with the ball, the momentum of my arm follows through the movement and swings round back down to my side by extending my elbow and shoulder before abducting out again slightly, as well as my other arm, when landing stably back on the ground with a wide, stable base. The bones which endure the most during serving of volleyball are femur, fibula, and tibia when jumping, and humerus, radius, and ulna when hitting the ball. By applying this, I am able to complete a successful serve while following the 6 formation components, which are bigger to smaller muscles, correct sequence, period of time, the direction of force, following the movement through, and stable base. Formation helped me to become a better player, despite still struggling with the consistency of continuously hitting perfect serves, which will only come with more practice. The next biomechanical principle I applied was projectile motion. Projectile motion is a form of motion in which an object is thrown or struck and moves along a curved path under the action of gravity. I applied this by incorporating my body and putting the right angle of contact with my hand and the ball in order to get the most out of my serve. This consisted of hitting the ball in mid-jump, so that I wasn't having to angle my shot upwards when making contact with the ball. Because the ground has less inertia, I am able to push off to increase the height at which the ball is hit. Because of this, I was able to angle my shot fairly flat before being pulled down by gravity into the other half of the court to make it hard for the opposition to return it. This is achieved by using a significant amount of power at a fairly straight angle, letting gravity pull it down as it gets to the opposite side of the court. This is more effective than hitting the ball at a higher angle of release, as it will just float over, applying less force when it hits the ground on the opposite side, and being easier for the opposition to return it. Increasing my height of release by jumping higher and engaging my legs more, and lowering angle of release by adjusting the angle in my arm and wrist when making contact with the ball, as long as it is a big enough angle to go over the net, so the ball will have a straighter path through the air and less power will be lost. Getting sufficient speed of release on the ball is important, so the ball has enough inertia to go over the net before it is brought down to the ground by gravity. This is achievable by using the rules of formation and hitting the ball with enough power by engaging my muscles. Another factor which affects my serve is air resistance. This plays a part as it acts on the horizontal component of the volleyball's path. As volleyballs are fairly light, they are easier to hit with a lot of speed compared to heavy objects, but are more affected by air resistance, slowing down the ball as it travels through the air, changing the trajectory and lowering its horizontal distance. Projectile motion also occurs as I throw the ball up. This is because I need to judge how much force to throw it up with, so I have enough time to prepare my strike before gravity brings the ball back down. Using projectile motion in my training, I gained a better understanding of where and how I should be hitting the ball, so I can continue to find the right angle I should be hitting the ball at to get the most out of my serve. Before using projectile motion for my serve, the balls that went over tended to go very high and floated over slowly, making it easier for the opposition to return. After understanding now, I incorporate the jump into my serve so I don't have to angle my serve as high. by making contact with the ball further back rather than hitting the bottom of it. The final biomechanical principle which I applied in my training was Newton's laws. These three laws are: an object at rest tends to remain at rest unless acted upon by some external force. When a force acts upon a mass, the result is acceleration of that mass. And finally, for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The first law was applied to my serve, as once the force of me striking the ball has been exerted, the ball will remain in motion until gravity and air resistance bring it down. Being that volleyballs have very little inertia, as they are very light, they tend to lose speed quicker, which is why sufficient power is needed from the external force to get it over the net. The advantage of having a light ball, which ties into the second law, is that a lower mass means an increase in acceleration. By applying more force with greater the acceleration, being able to overcome its low inertia and vulnerability to gravity and air resistance. The third law relates to my volleyball serve, as when I hit the ball, there is an equal and opposite reaction. As the ball is brought back down by gravity after throwing it up, this is the action force. As I jump into the air and make contact with the ball with the palm of my hand, this acts as the reaction force because my body has more inertia and the ball is the reaction as the force applied makes it travel through the air. By using these laws in my training, I was able to understand how force works with the ball and apply this. Before understanding Newton's laws, I didn't understand how I should be hitting the ball and why it is important to strike it with power, but now I am more knowledgeable and can apply what I have learned into my serve by hitting the ball with substantial force to make it hard for the opposition. The three main sport psychology factors I applied to my training were visualization, goal setting, and confidence. Using visualization helped me understand what I wanted myself to achieve. I could picture myself becoming a confident volleyball player, which motivated myself to take the steps needed to achieve it. By visualizing what I needed to work on, picking up on what I was doing wrong, was a key step to becoming better at serving. This meant I could break down the components of my serve and work on a different part each lesson before putting it all together. Goal setting also played a big part in my volleyball training. By setting goals often, I had a clear path of what I wanted to achieve and felt more motivated to get out and do it. By goal setting, this helped me motivate me to train hard even when I didn't feel like it. The final factor, confidence, played a part in my volleyball training, as by having more confidence, I was able to become a more competent player. Being confident meant I was able to talk to others and work with them to improve my serve, and step out of my comfort zone to play with people above my level of skill and force myself to get better. By understanding the three main biomechanical principles, force summation, projectile motion, and Newton's laws, I was able to become a more confident volleyball player and server by incorporating what I had learnt in my training. By breaking down the components of my serve, I was able to progress from originally sitting in the cognitive stage to the associative stage now. By continuing to practice, I will hopefully improve myself even more. I felt that force summation helped me the most, as it taught me the most in terms of how I should position my body, which was a turning point in me becoming the better player.